Hello, everyone. My name is Zachary Zalowitz. I am the new Global Events and Training Coordinator here at Action Coach. Some of you I have met through email, and so it's nice to put a voice to the name. Today, I'm super excited to be giving you Tony Alessandra. Tony Alessandra, he is the founder of Assessments 24/7. Um, from here on out, I will give it over to him. If you have any questions, please type them in, and they'll be answered at the end of the broadcast. All right, guys, have a great webinar.
Thank you, Zach. I appreciate it. And I am so pleased to introduce Jennifer Voitlin. She is our Director of Instructional Design and Certification here at Assessments 24/7. Let me tell you a little bit about Jennifer. And by the way, she's going to do an actual DISC debrief of our DISC report. So this is really, really, really important for you to listen to. And you know, if there's areas within the report that you're a little unclear on, particularly if people ask you questions about it, this is the time to really get clear on it. So let me tell you a little bit about Jennifer. She, as I said, she is our in-house certification coach/mentor, professional values or motivators analyst, and our instructional designer for client customization and resource development. So in other words, if you need slides or an instructional plan put together for, let's say, DISC or motivators or learning styles, she is the person to call. Now, she holds a Washington State Secondary Education Teaching Certificate, a Bachelor of Arts in English with an emphasis on composition and rhetoric. I better watch what I'm saying here and how I'm saying it. A Master of Arts in Adult Education and Training, a Master of Science in Psychology, and an MBA with an emphasis in Human Resource Management. Wow. Quite a good educational background. She's also certified in a variety of training courses and development workshops with vendors all over the world. Her work history has included personal and professional development, secondary and adult education, customer service, corporate finance, and investor relations. Now, here's an interesting thing. Jen is an avid painter. She is a professional singer. Actually, last year, she sang at Carnegie Hall in New York City. She's a blessed wife and an active mom to 3 boys. So without any further ado, where we're going to get our DISC debrief, Jen, take it away.
Thank you, Tony. What an introduction. I'm a little bit embarrassed and kind of blushing about how awesome I am. And I'm so excited to be on this call and to share what it is that I do and what it is that these reports can do and what it is that you can also do to help your clients and your coaching clients and the people around you feel really comfortable with this work, this assessment, and this report. So the first thing that I want to do as we get started is just set you up with a little background of what we're going to do today. The report that you see on your screen is the DISC self, and you'll notice it says in the center of the report, it's the sample report. What I'm going to do is debrief the sample report from our Assessments 24/7 website so that you can refer to this report at any time and match it up to any notes you might be taking. It'll be the one that's available for you right there on our site. You may notice, if you've worked with me before or if you've had a debrief done before, that this example is going to be slightly different than a typical debrief. The reason for that is because typically a debrief is a conversation. There's responses, there's confirmation, there's questions, there's a partnership between the person who's being debriefed and the person doing the debriefing. We're not going to do that today because I'm here on my own sharing with you what it is that we have. So there are some things that you'll notice that are a little different than what would happen in a traditional debrief. You'll also notice that I'm going to talk a little bit about how to do this in groups versus in an individual format so that you can see where there may be slight nuances or differences in the place that you share this. I would absolutely encourage sharing in groups if you're doing a larger group session, but the sharing looks a little different. The last thing to note is that I will not be offering the same kind of coaching or suggestions that I would offer in an individual debrief because we just don't have the time for that, and without someone to have a conversation with, the coaching may or may not make sense. So instead, what I'm going to share with you is a page-by-page sample debrief that also gives you some how-tos and some suggestions of what to do with each page of the report. And occasionally I'll step outside of the debrief to provide you some insight into how to have the conversation, or what questions to ask, or where to move forward or step back, depending on the needs of the person you're working with. So this debrief comes directly from our DISC certified debrief, and we have a certification program that you can become certified in debriefing DISC and sharing DISC that will give you a much more in-depth understanding as well as additional guidance in how to share this. However, on the trainer's material site that you have access to now, you have the opportunity to see a DISC debrief guide that is for non-certified coaches. That'll give you a lot of the same information and the same guidance that you'll see or hear throughout today. If at any point you have questions, if you have interest in DISC certification, if you need any support with instructional design, as Tony mentioned, I absolutely encourage you to reach out either through Angie or Zach, or directly through Tony or to me, and we will do our very best to support you. So without further ado, I'm going to click through the DISC self-assessment and talk about each of the pages. So the cover page gives us some information about which company we're working with. The table of contents is going to align for us what it is that we're looking at as we go. In a DISC debrief, I always start with page 3. The reason that I start here is because of this paragraph section right in the center that starts with behavioral styles. It's important to note that what we're looking at here are 4 different behavioral styles. This report makes it easy to identify and understand our own styles, recognize other styles, and work on cognitively adapting to those different styles to develop a process of communicating more effectively with others. It's our choice to consciously decide to apply what we learn, and it's not easy. It takes practice, but with effort, we can adapt for increased communication. And that's what this assessment and report is about, is showing us who we are and how to work more effectively with others. Now, it's important to recognize from the very beginning what DISC is and what DISC is not. DISC is a simple, practical, easy to remember, and universally applicable model that focuses on patterns of observable behavior and emotion. It's a combination of the things that we are born with, our nature, and the things that we learn as we grow in our nurture. It is not a measure of our intelligence, our skills, our education or experience, or an indicator of our values. It's simply looking at our observable behaviors and our emotions. And these are the 4 areas that we measure based on direct and indirect tendencies, or guarded and open tendencies. The styles are dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness. And throughout this report, we'll learn a lot more about them. When we go to pages 4 and 5, which work together, these 2 pages are the general characteristics page. So this serves as a narrative of your style. Again, the D, the I, the S, and the C, and your particular breakdown to each of them. So as you read through the general characteristics pages, I would ask that you recognize 2 or 3 things that really stand out to you, and consider why it is that those are the things that come to attention. What is it about those particular items that are so important? What is it that you would want to have others know about you based on this narrative report? And again, pages 4 and 5 work together. Now, in a group setting, I would ask that 1 or 2 of these items be shared with the group. In an individual setting, I would ask for all 3 to be shared with me as the coach, and we would talk about why those characteristics are things that are important to recognize, or why they stand out to that particular individual. This is also going to give us some insight into the focus of the person we're working with, or the group that we're working with. We'll start to identify trends that they notice in the report that can become great coaching opportunities. So this is a really important place to start. One of the other things that's really important about these 2 pages are, most of the time, you will hear that people are surprised by how much accuracy shows up in these 2 pages in this narrative. So it creates immediate buy-in. Now, if there is someone who doesn't feel that this is entirely accurate about them, that's okay. No report is 100% accurate. And you'll find that even if there are statements here and there that may need some modification or further exploration because they may be blind spots for that person, most of the time there's a great deal of information in here that is accurate for them and helps them to immediately identify with their style. After we talk about pages 4 and 5 and we've moved through the general characteristics, we begin some of the bullet point pages. So page 6 is about your strengths. This is about what you bring to the table no matter what the circumstance, the amazing things that you just are because you are. At the top of the page, you'll see a list of strengths. At the bottom of the page, you'll see a list of work style tendencies. What I ask is that you identify a few items from each of these two lists that you think are most important. Again, whether to share with someone else or because they just really resonate with you. And throughout the report, you have the opportunity to transfer this information to page 14, where it will give you a summary of your style. We'll see that page coming up. But this is the first place where we can really pull some information to create that summary to share with others. Now, with these natural strengths that you possess and these work style tendencies, you can also share this in a group. This does not have to be an individual conversation only. One of the wonderful things about this is people in a group that have worked together for a while can very easily recognize these strengths in others, again, because this is based on our observable behavior. So this is a place where you can have people naturally focus on the things that are strengths for them as opposed to their negative, which is where we tend to focus when we look at assessments and things like this. The next page is a bullet point of our motivators. So this is our motivations, wants, and needs. At the top of the page, you have a section devoted to your motivations, your wants. At the bottom of the page, you have a section devoted to your needs. Now, one of the things that I joke about with my clients and the people that I work with is sometimes the things that we want are not the things that we need. The things that we need are not the things that we want. So it's important to recognize what this page is all about. Our motivation is our willingness or our enthusiasm to do something. And while we all have motivations, we're all motivated for different reasons. We're motivated by what we want, but sometimes our behavior is also supported by the things we need, whether we really appreciate that or want that or not. So the more fully our needs are met, the easier it is for us to perform at an optimal level. And this page reveals some of the places where you can ask for support and some of the things that you know will be good drivers for you. The last bullet point page that we have in this section is your motivations, ideal work environment. Now this page is all about when we are in our most effective environment, we can be our most effective self. We are likely to be more self-motivated to accomplish, and we can show up in the way we intend to show up when our environment supports us. Now, depending on the circumstance of your client may have a lot of influence over these particular environments. Sometimes they will not. If they work in a large organization or if you are in a large organization, you may not have the opportunity to bring in all of these bullet points. But if you can even bring in a few of them, it's important to have an environment that supports you to help you be your most effective self. And again, we recommend that you choose a few items from this list that really resonate with you or are really important with you, share them on the summary page, and then also share them with your leader or any others that you work with who may be able to help create an effective environment. Now at this point, Tony, I want to stop and see if we have any questions about those first 8 pages.
Nothing yet. No questions
Wonderful. Yet. Okay, then we'll continue to truck along. All right, the next piece that we look at is page 9. This is the behaviors and needs under stress page. Now this is a page that I like to spend a bit of time on because of the importance of what it reveals and where it comes from. So as you know, from being familiar with the DISC assessment, there are 2 different behavioral styles that we're looking at here, your natural style and your adapted style. Your natural style is who you are without the influence of anyone else and how you would behave without any other motivation, without any other consideration, without any other outside influence on what it is that you do. Your adapted style is how you think you should behave given the circumstance or the situation that you are in. Now, sometimes those are in alignment with one another. Sometimes there are ways that we adapt our behavior for our environment and our situations that make a lot of sense. And so one of the things that we look at through this report is how are we when we behave naturally and how are we when we behave in a circumstance. This page, Behaviors and Needs Under Stress, comes from your natural style tendency. Now, the reason for that is because when we are experiencing stress and tension, we are not able to consider what adapting looks like. We go to our natural tendency. We operate from instinct. When we are pushed up against our stuff, we revert to how we would behave in a natural circumstance without any other pressures. So in this case, when we're looking at your behaviors and needs under stress, our sample person has an I style. At the top of the page, you'll see that under stress, this person may appear impulsive, manipulative, overeager, inconsistent, and unrealistic. Now, many times in the conversation, someone will make a remark or say something that is not exactly positive about these words or these phrases. The reality is sometimes when we overextend our strengths or when we're experiencing a lot of stress and tension, we don't show up the way we wish we did. So the importance of this page is to look at how do others perceive us when we experience this stress, and does that match our intention? If it doesn't match our intention, we have some control over the way we appear, as long as we have awareness of that that's what we look like. And as long as we can preemptively look at how to prevent ourselves from appearing this way, given that we know we're going to be experiencing stress. Now, something that's really important to remember is that stress is unavoidable. So we behave this way probably more often than we wish, depending on the amount of stress we experience. And by being able to look at the kind of supports we need during types of stress, we can relieve or reduce this kind of interaction with people. The second section on this page is under stress, the things that you need. So again, what kinds of support do you need? And you may know that there are things that work for you to decompress your stress level. I would absolutely recommend adding those to this page for you. If you go for a walk, if you meditate, if you just need to vent with a friend, all of those things can be great ways to reduce stress and, again, influence the way others may perceive you when you are experiencing tension. The last part of this page is about typical behaviors and conflict and strategies to reduce that conflict and increase harmony. One of the things that I love about this particular portion of the report is when it comes to the strategies to reduce conflict, we're not only looking at ways to reduce conflict within yourself, but also how to reduce conflict with others. So you'll notice that some coaching is given here that talks about how can we reduce conflict with those around us by creating more effective communication. This can be, again, very powerful when looking at how to prevent having a situation happen or communication happen when we are experiencing stress and tension that is not our very best self. So this is a page to pay special attention to. And a lot of times when coaching, this is a place where people will want to focus their attention as well. All right, moving forward to page 10, this is the communication tips and plans for others page. This page is designed to give you a simple do's and don'ts list about how others should communicate with you. Top of the page, you have when communicating with me, do these things. The bottom of the page, you have when communicating with me, don't do these things. But the don'ts are here for a very specific reason. When someone does the things on the don't list, we cannot hear them. Not in a position to be able to hear their message because we get stuck in how they're sharing it. And this can be a big inhibitor to effective communication. Now, the do's list allows us to be open, allows us to hear what's being said, allows us to share ideas more effectively. I had a client tell me once that he was going to put this page on a t-shirt and wear it around for everyone he knew so that they would know how best to communicate with him. I absolutely recommend that. So again, this page is all about how others can communicate more effectively with you. On pages 11 and 12, we also give you a cheat sheet, if you will, of how to communicate with other styles. So you'll see a table for each of the 4 styles on pages 11 and 12. These tables are static information. So everyone that has this report is going to have these same 2 pages. And it will give you an example or some suggestions for ways to communicate with others based on their style. So you'll notice at the top of the table, it talks about which style it is you're looking at. In this case, the red is the dominant style. On the left side, you'll see the characteristics of that style. And on the right side, you'll see ways for you to communicate with them, to speak to and support those characteristics. And you'll see that it's the same kind of table for each of the 4 styles. So you can refer to this when you are planning conversations, particularly with styles different from your own, to have a way to approach the conversation for them to see in the way you share what you would like them to hear. The next page that we have is our potential areas for improvement page. Now, one of the things that I point out on this page is the potential on this page is there for a reason. It's a very deliberate choice of words. You'll notice if you look through the areas of potential improvement, these may or may not be things that currently stand in someone's way. These may be things that are wonderful about who you are, and yet when overextended or when pushed too far or when happening under stressful or tense circumstances may become a limitation, a struggle, or a weakness. So there are things to be aware of. Now, in a coaching session, this is a place I spend a lot of time. I ask people to share with me their top 2 areas for improvement. Typically, by this point of the report, there is a very visible theme that is emerging through the conversation. And this is a place where we can spend some real time organizing thoughts around action planning, paying attention to how does this show up, how does this prevent my success, how does this increase my success, where are the ways that I need to be really aware of this if it comes to light frequently. Again,
Jen, before you move on,
yes.
Jen, before you move on, I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
All right. Typically, how long does a one-to-one debrief take?
Depending on the style, anywhere from 60 to 90 minutes.
All right, so 60
Sometimes
to
it can
90
be a lot quicker if you've got a high D or a high C who doesn't want to engage in the conversation as much, we'll say.
Right, okay. All right, and I have one other. Let me pull that question up, and that is, do you send the report to a client, let the client read it themselves, and then debrief, or do you run through the report when you are actually doing the debrief?
I would say you can do that either way. If you would like the client to come prepared with the information in front of them so that you can talk through it in a deeper conversation, then I would send it ahead of time, have them come prepared after reading it and making some notes. If you would prefer to walk them through, my only caveat with that is to make sure you've got the time to let them digest and read through each piece. And recognize that different styles are going to take a different amount of time to do that. You're going to have people who need more time to let it sink in. You're going to have people who want to talk about it more through the process. So you need to be aware of the amount of time it's going to take, but it's really a matter of personal preference and the amount of time you have available.
Right. Okay.
Tony, would you add anything more to that?
No, perfect.
Okay. All right, so then page 14 is that summary page that I've been referencing as we go. So you'll see that you have an opportunity here to note those 2 most important from each of the pages: your strengths, your work style tendencies, your motivation wants, your needs, the ideal work environment, the do's and the don'ts, and the potential areas for improvement. Now, this page can be used in a variety of ways. So it can be used before a debrief for someone to read through their assessment and come prepared for that conversation like we just spoke about. It can also provide some insight, again, into those tendencies or patterns that you see when you begin a debrief with someone if you have an option to see their summary ahead of time. It can be used throughout to capture those thoughts as you are going through each page and debriefing. It can also be used as a debrief activity that they can take away as a wrap-up. So once you've had the conversation, you send them on their way and ask them to summarize the things that they learned. And one of the wonderful things that can be useful with this page is that it's a great way to share with others who also know the DISC language or to introduce others to the DISC language, because this gives you a one-page summary of the things that were revealed through this assessment and report that can really provide some insight and build effective communication much more quickly for people. There's lots of different ways that this can be used, and again, it's up to your preference. Sometimes organizations will dictate how this is used, but it can be effective in a lot of different ways. All right, going on to cases 15 and 16, when I do a report debrief with someone, there are two ways that I like to manage these 2 pages. The first is I like to teach you how to read it, and then the second is to look at what the information shares with us. I'm going to do that here, and we're just going to pretend that our sample person is here working with me, and I'm going to make some assumptions based on the style information that's presented as if I were having a conversation with someone. You won't hear that part, but you'll get to see the event that unfolds as a result. So the first thing that I'll show you is at the top of pages 15 and 16, you will see that we're looking at 2 different styles here. So page 15 is the word sketch for your adapted style. Page 16 is the word sketch for your natural style. So it's important to note which style you're approaching here. The next thing to look at is this color area at the top of the table that has the D, the I, the S, and the C. Just below that, you've got a gray bar that says DISC focus. Now, another way to think of this is instead of DISC focus, how I respond to these 4 areas. How do I respond to problems and tasks? How do I respond to people? How do I respond to the pace or the environment? How do I respond to procedures? Each of these columns will share with you descriptors of how you respond or how you put attention into each of these areas. You'll also notice here under the DISC focus area, there's a bar of needs, a bar of observable behavior, and a bar of fears. This information is going to be the same on everyone's report. This is just to give you a reminder of what each of these styles look like, where they're coming from, and the things that they're up against as you look at the 2 different styles side by side. The next thing to note about these 2 pages is the scale on the left side from 1 to 6. This is your intensity scale. So 1 is low intensity, which means you do not put a lot of energy into this area in comparison to the other areas. 6 is a high intensity, which means that is a very observable expression of your energy. This is where you would focus your area first if you had a high intensity level. This gray line through the center is your midline or your energy line, and this separates the 50% mark. So if anything below that is going to be considered a lower intensity, anything above it is a higher intensity, and then you have respectively very low to very high. So as we look at the words that are highlighted in the corresponding colors here that describe our sample in this adaptive style, we can see that according to the way this person responds to problems and tasks, they are mild, they seek consensus, they're unobtrusive, and they weigh the pros and cons. In people focus, we look at their charming, influential, sociable, and trusting. In terms of the pace and the environment, consistent, cooperative, possessive, and relaxed. When it comes to procedures, they're their own person, they're self-assured, opinionated, and persistent. We have 2 areas that are higher and 2 areas that are lower. And we'll look at this in another way in just a few minutes. Now, if we compare this with page 16, their natural style, we'll see that there are some differences here. So this person's natural style tends to be a little bit higher in their D. They take more calculated risks, they're more moderate, questioning, and unassuming when it comes to problems and tasks. Their I is the same. Their S goes up slightly to compose, or goes up slightly to their adaptive style, so it's a little lower in their natural style, with composed, deliberate, steady, and stable. Their C style also is a little bit different, with analytical, neat, sensitive, and tactful in regard to the way that they approach procedures. So one of the things that we look at here is where do the boxes shift from? Where is there a difference, and why is that happening? and we continue this conversation onto page 17. Now, page 17 shows the graphs side by side. So if we looked back at page 15, we would see that the colored boxes indicate the same kinds of levels as what we see in this adapted graph 1. If we look at page 16, again, those colored boxes indicate the same kinds of levels as what we see in this natural style graph 2. The difference is on page 15 and 16, they're a scale from 1 to 6. Here, they're a scale from 0 to 100, which gives us a much closer view of how this shift happens. I'm going to zoom in here a little bit so that you can see the numbers a little bit more effectively. So when we look at these two graphs side by side, it's very evident where the shift happens in each of these different areas. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. I want you to notice the numbers below each of these graphs that indicates the percentage or the points on a scale from 0 to 100. And again, you can see how the points shift from the natural style to the adapted style. The next thing to note is this pattern area below each of the graphs. This indicates your style pattern. Now, there is a difference between capital letters and lowercase letters. So what you'll notice is that the capital letters are your primary style, lowercase letters are your secondary style. Typically, your primary style is also going to be higher intensity than your lowercase letters. They'll be a lower intensity. As you can see, these sit right toward the middle, so the S and the C are lowercase, where the S is up here as a higher style, which makes it a capital letter. The last thing to note about this pattern is these numbers in parentheses right here beyond the letters indicates the boxes that were highlighted on the descriptors page. So if we look back at 15, you can kind of see it little here up on my screen on the left. You'll see that that box that's highlighted for D is a 2. The box that's highlighted for the I is a 5. The box highlighted for the S is a 5, and the box highlighted for the C is a 3. So this indicates to you those descriptor boxes and where they were highlighted. The same for the natural style graph. If you compared this graph and these numbers to number 16, you'll see that the D was in a 3, the I was in a 5, the S is in a 4, and the C is in a 4. So you can see on that 1 to 6 scale where they shift down on this page. Now, when we get to this page, there's a lot of coaching that can happen around this and a lot of conversations that can happen around this. I spend a lot of time with my people on this page. There are several things that these graphs can indicate to me. So the first thing that I want to look at is the difference between the different styles. We call that the delta. So if we look at the delta between the natural style B and the adapted style B, we'll notice that from our natural style to our adapted style, this person is dropping 14 points. Now, when we look at the amount of energy that is expended, anything over about 15 to 20 points is a cause for conversation. So I would ask my client to start looking at and considering, does this change in their D style, the pulling back of that dominant style, make sense to them? And is it something that was specific to this circumstance in mind, or is it something that they're doing long term? And we'll talk more about that in just a moment. But I would ask them to consider, is this difference something that makes sense? And is it something that's happening short term or long term? When we look at the I, we can see that there is a 7-point spread here between the adapted and the natural style. Now, in this case, it's coming up 7 points. So again, does that make sense? Is that something that happens long-term or short-term? And what does it mean to be pushing forward energy in this area and pulling back energy in the D? We'll talk about that again in just a moment. When we look at the S, you'll notice there's a much more significant delta here. The 52 in the natural style is being pushed up to a 73 in the adapted style. That's a 21-point difference. So as I said, when you get to about 20 points, we start to look at what is causing this significant shift in this area. Does that make sense? Is it happening short-term or long-term? And then lastly, with the C, a 52 point in the natural style to a 48 in the adapted style. So that's pulling back by 4 points. And does that make sense? Is it happening short-term and long-term? Now, when reading these graphs together, what I would say about this person in general is based on the scores that are presented, this person is relational. They're a people-focused person. They like to be interactive. They're friendly, they're warm, and they're thoughtful. And we can see that in their I styles and their S styles in both of these graphs. This person tends to be a strong helper with a high S, especially in their adaptive style, but also sitting above the 50% line. They're a person who wants to provide support to others. They're a good listener. They're cooperative and receptive. They pay attention to what's in it for the people around them. With this high I in both of these areas, they're a person who values energy. They're a feeling person. They're an optimistic person. They want people to get along. They want people to have fun. They have a lot of energy. Now, with this S style being above the line, above the 50% line, there's also a tendency here to mask emotions. So while they're an open person who will share with people, they may mask their real feelings depending on the circumstance. With this S being as high as it is, these are safety conscious individuals. So this person wants to be energetic and optimistic and be a people person and have the spotlight. This person wants to make sure that they're being safe. So when you put those two things together, they may want everyone to get along. They may avoid some conflict. And sometimes they may rely on their feelings far more than they would on logic, especially if it's in the interest of other people or themselves. This person also tends to be verbally expressive. So with a high I, a high S, and a lower C, they're likely to talk about what it is that they're thinking about and feeling. Even if because of these scores being a little lower over here, they will mask their emotions in some instances. This person values influence and connection. They easily develop trust, and they are known for energizing others. They're talkative. They like to express themselves. They'll use words and gestures. And you can see their excitement and their enthusiasm. They'll probably tend to be a person who's fairly charming. Now, the other thing to note about this person is when you look at the differences between these two, which can be seen on this wheel over here, or the disc diamond, or the behavior pattern view, this has a lot of names, you'll see that for the most part, they sit in supportive and persuasive. However, in their adapted environment, they're a little higher intensity. In their natural style, they're going to be a little more adaptable because they have more in common with others, as you can see here, with their numbers sitting all toward the center. Now, a couple of things that I talked about with asking questions. Does this shift make sense? And is there something to be concerned with about time? Is this happening short-term or long-term? So if the person had the conversation with me that this shift does make sense, let's say at work, they tend to be in front of a classroom, or they tend to be with other people, and so they become much more influencing, much more expressive, much more engaging at work than they would in their natural style. They also tend to be a person who works well in a team, so they pull up their supportive behaviors. They want to be a good team player. They might provide support for a team as a manager. That would make sense that these styles would push forward. They may hold back on some of their dominance, and they may hold back on some of their conscientiousness, depending on their environment. Now, it's important to note that when we look at this wheel on the right side, you'll see that the D and the S are opposite of one another, which means it would make sense that if someone is moving more toward the S, they would be pulling away from the D. The same is true about C's and I's. C's are up here, I's down here. If someone's moving more toward the I, they would be pulling away from the C. And that's exactly what happens in this graph. Where the D comes down, the S is going up. Where the I is going up, the C is coming down. So those are things that are important to note. Now, if this person said to me, this kind of energy that I'm exhibiting in my adapted style is long-term, I would ask them to consider the amount of energy that it takes for them to put forth that adapted style. Because it could be that with a change of 20 points or 21 points in this S specifically, and a change in 14 points from this D, that they may find that their job is very tiring on the days that they have to push forth this energy and pull back this D energy, or whatever the circumstance is, that they may find that they are not as energized at the end of the day because they are using their energy in a way that is different from how they naturally would choose to do so. Again, their C and their I scores don't create that much discrepancy, so they may not notice that there's a big energy shift there, but the D and the F is definitely something to pay attention to. Now, the other thing is that there can be a conflict here that exists between this desire to freely express emotion in the I and this also desire to mask emotion and keep their cards kind of close to the chest. So they may experience times where, especially if they're not feeling safe, they'll mask their true emotions, which may make them feel like they're withholding. And that's something to be aware of in the tendency of a person who's a very high I and wants to share and be open and expressive with all people, the times that they feel like they need to pull back and be more guarded. Now, the last thing that this particular page indicates to me is with this high style in both the I, or the natural and the adaptive style, are the fears that are associated with I. So if you remember back on page 16 and 15 at the top, there are fears here that show what I's are challenged with. In this case, being left out, a loss of social approval. There's also a fear of failure that can be present here, a fear of not being liked, that comes with the social approval, and a fear of being misunderstood, which would lead to being left out. I's have a great desire and need for being understood, for being successful, and for being liked. So this is something that I would talk with my client about when doing a debrief, is how do those things show up and how do our behaviors support them? All right, Tony, before we go to the 12 integrated disc styles, do we have any other questions?
Yes, we do. Here's an interesting one. Somebody asked, what do you charge for the report? Not you, but in general, what should somebody charge for a report and the one-to-one debrief? Do you have any? I mean, I have an idea if you want me to answer it.
Please do, Tony. I know what I would charge, but I would love for you to take this one.
Yeah, I would say that obviously the retail price for a disc assessment, which you'll see on our site, is $97. I find that when people debrief, they're usually charging an extra $100 on up. I know somebody who charges at least $300 for the disc report and debrief, but they are certified. I do think that if you are a certified, a disc certified coach, you can charge a little bit more, or at least justify it more, because you really go through a whole in-depth process with Jennifer on our side, and you get a not only a certificate but also a badge that you can put in your SIG file. So I would say, other than what you're going to charge for the, and I can't tell you what to charge, I can only tell you what the retail price is. I would say tack on maybe another $100 plus. Remember, it's going to take you anywhere from 60 minutes on up. If you give them the report to read first, it's probably 60 to 90 minutes. If you're going to go through the report for the first time with them, they haven't seen it in advance, they're going to see it while you're going through the debrief, then you're probably looking more like 90 to 120 minutes. But that's my answer, Jim.
That sounds about right to me.
Okay, and by the way, we have 15 minutes left.
Excellent. Were there other questions, Tony, or was that the only one?
I believe that was the last one so far.
All right. Well, more to come if there are more questions. All right. So the next section of the report, there are 4 pages that go together. I'm going to zoom back out so that you can see these a little bit better. So pages 18 to 21 are all the 12 integrated disc style relationships. Now, there's a lot of confusion that comes the first time someone sees this because it doesn't feel intuitive. So what I teach people to do in a debrief is read this report section as it is, we don't talk very much about it. I do share if I notice tendencies or patterns. However, this is something that I recommend they take away and digest. And if there are questions about it, come back and talk to me. Because once they understand how to read it, it's a lot easier to take advantage of the information that's here versus trying to get them to understand all in one sitting what these 12 behaviors look like. So what we're looking at here, as you can see by this graphic at the top of page 18, are the 4 styles: dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness, and how they interact with one another to create new behaviors. So when the dominant style interacts with this individual's influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness, new behaviors are going to be formed. This happens for all of us because we're a blend of styles. So our behavior can look very different even if we share a high style with someone else. So for example, if Tony and I have the same high B, we may behave very differently because our I's, our S, and our C might look different. So what we're looking at here is how do these integrate to create new behaviors. Now if we look at the next 2 pages, or 3 pages, we'll see how this works for this individual. So when this individual's styles are compared, the 12 behaviors presented from highest intensity to lowest intensity are given in this report. So the first behavior that shows up for this person is the one we're going to use as our example of how to read this. So what we're looking at here is the title of the behavior, the sociable behavior. And what this looks at is how this person's I, their highest style, is influenced by their D, which is their lowest style. So in this case, sociable behavior for them is a high moderate intensity. Now intensity, the scoring for this is on the bottom of page 21, and it shows you that high intensity is scores that are clearly observable and displayed more often or seen in most situations. Low intensity is an absence of this behavior in most situations. So when we look at intensity for these 12 behaviors, we're looking at how frequently do they show up. Now after you have the title, the comparison of the style, and the intensity, you'll see a bar that indicates this person's score in this area. The black bar is their individual score. So this person sits right around a 60 in the sociable behavior. This blue box that is around this score is the general population score. So 68% of the population falls within the blue box. In this case, the person also sits within this box. But you can see these scores all over the board. Again, they're listed in this report according to this individual's highest intensity style. So you'll see that the scores decrease as you look through each of these behaviors. The next thing to note is this paragraph of information that's listed here. This will give you a couple of pieces of information. First, what this is looking at, what the definition is of the sociable behavior, if you will. And then secondly, what high intensity scores look like and what low intensity scores look like. So this person can determine, what does this look like in my world? So the first behavior is going to be their highest intensity. The last behavior is going to be their lowest intensity. Now, something that's important to note is in the middle of page 20, where the behavior shifts from 6 to 7, you will notice that this becomes a mirror image of the behavior. So behavior 6, the persistence behavior for this person is how the S is influenced by the C. Behavior 7, the precision behavior for this person is how the C is influenced by the S. So you'll notice that from here down to 12, from 7 to 12, these are inverse relationships of the first 6 behaviors. Now, I know that that can be a little overwhelming to take on. And again, in the DISC debrief guide that's provided on the trainer's material site, there's a different explanation that goes into more detail with this particular measurement. However, it's important to note that once you've compared the behaviors up to number 6, you've covered all of the combinations from one perspective. From 7 to 12, you're looking at the inverse relationship. Now, what's interesting about this particular person is all of their scores are moderate. I don't typically see every score as a moderate score. This person does have one low moderate, but it still fits within the population. In my experience, this is uncommon. Most of the time, you've got high intensity scores and lower intensity scores. When doing coaching for this area, one of the places that I focus the attention is the lower intensity scores. Because, number one, they are an inverse of a high intensity score, which means they may have an effect on your effectiveness. They may have some influence over your ability to manage through problems or to work with people. And it's important to look at those lower scores to see if I make an adjustment here, how can my behavior bring a new result? So in coaching, I always look at the lowest behaviors. Again, this report is kind of unusual in that they all sit in the moderate intensity. Now again, as I said before, if at any point someone has questions about that after they've digested those pieces, I ask them to get back in touch with me to talk to them more. Most of the time, once they've learned how to read it, it becomes very clear and they don't have a lot of questions. But if they do, I'm always available to answer them. Now, page 22 should look familiar. This was also the same graphic that we saw in the middle of page 17. So if we go back up here, you'll see that it's right here. Page 22 looks at it in a little different version. It gives us some descriptors around the outside of the wheel. It makes it bigger so that we can look at what it is that's happening on this chart. The things that I like to point out about this particular view are that, as I said on page 17, we're looking at the difference between our natural and our adaptive style, if one exists. We're looking at adaptability. So if you sit closer to the center, you have more adaptability. It'll come easier to you because you have more in common with folks that are different styles. The further out you are in the circle, the higher tendency you have or intensity in that area. So it may be more difficult for you to adapt to styles different from your own. And what that means is it'll take more energy for you to adapt, and it may take more mindfulness and awareness. Doesn't mean that it's not possible. It just means that it's going to be a little more difficult for you and take more energy for you to adapt to others that are different from you. Now, one of the other things that I love about this particular view is it does have an opportunity to plot a variety of different people. So you can choose different people in your admin site to plot on this graph and be able to compare how others stand. So I'm going to drag over another document to show you what this looks like real quickly. So it can look like this, where you can plot a whole team or a whole group of people and see where do we have a lot of people gathered, where do we have strengths, where do we have challenges, what can we do to strengthen our environment as a team and provide more balance, work with one another more effectively. So this allows you to pull those group reports, which is really, really fun and can be really helpful for different groups of people. Now, there's also on our trainer materials site an FAQ that has a lot of information about this particular view. We'll get a lot of questions about what do the segment numbers mean, what happens if I don't have a star or a circle. There are explanations for all of those things. We don't have time to cover it here, but if you want to know more, you can either reference that FAQ document or reach out to me directly, and I'm happy to help you figure out the differences. All right, Tony, any other questions before we go into application?
No more questions yet.
Wonderful.
And you have
right,
7 minutes.
Awesome. So as we get to the application portion of the assessment, all of the pages from 23 to the end are static pages. So everyone is going to have the same information available to them. And this is all about, now that I've learned my style and that I can start to recognize the style of others, how can I adapt my behavior to be more effective? So you've got a lot of resources here. You have an overview of the 4 basic styles, and it'll give you indicators in their highs for each of these different areas. You can see pace and priority, strengths, weaknesses, fears, irritations, how they measure worth, what they look like in the workplace, a variety of things to help you understand styles different from your own. You also have how to identify another person's behavioral style. So we give you the same disc wheel graphic that we saw before, and it gives you 2 power questions to ask. Are they direct or indirect? And are they guarded or open? And based on those 2 questions, you can likely predict their style so that you can work with them most effectively. The next section talks about how do we adapt our directness and openness. So if someone does have a different style from ours based on what we identify them as, how do we increase or decrease our directness? How do we increase or decrease our openness? So there are some suggestions here of how to do that more effectively, increasing your communication. Pages 29 and 30 look at the different tensions among the styles. So when someone is an S and they're working with a D, or when someone is an I and they're working with a C, they have two opportunities, if you will, for tension. They have the opportunity for a pace tension, because one side will go slower, one side will go faster. They also have the opportunity for priority tension, because one is focused on people and the other is focused on tasks, or because one is more guarded and one is more open, and one is more indirect and one is more direct. So these pages of the report talk about where those tensions lie based on the styles that we're working with. It also gives you an opportunity to look at a relationship that may be experiencing a conflict. Identify someone's style, their pace, their priorities, the difference, and then look at a strategy for increasing your communication with that person. Lastly, we've got a section on how to adapt to each of the styles based on different circumstances. So you have one page for each of the styles, the D, the I, the S, and the C, and it talks about at work how to help them, in sales and service how to behave with them, in social settings how they'll show up, and in learning settings how they'll be most effective. So that you can take a look at what situation do I have coming up and how can I be more effective with these different styles. And then lastly, there are some other assessments that are available that we give a list of at the end of the assessment so that people know that there are more resources available that measure different elements of who we are and how we show up and the ways we think. And this is at the end of each of the assessments so people can see what else is available.
I do have a question for you.
All right.
Okay, the question is, in a team of people, let's just say 4 people, after you do the one-to-one debrief, how can someone monetize ongoing coaching? Can they build like a 12-month coaching around the report? I know that's a
absolutely.
Okay, so give us an idea what you would do if this were in your domain.
Okay, so there are lots of different ways to use this information. There are lots of different ways you can focus your coaching. The first thing that I would say is that DISC is a measurement of behavior and emotion. So to provide ongoing coaching, I would recommend adding additional assessment resources. So one of my favorite combinations is the DISC and motivators, because motivators talks about what drives the behavior that we see. Additionally, we have the executive summary, which provides information about critical thinking style and decision making, which also influences the values that we have in motivators and again influences our behavior. So there's lots of different things that you can build upon when you're providing ongoing coaching. If you wanted to stick specifically with DISC, you could look at how behavior changes in different circumstances. You could look at the biggest challenges that reveal just in this first assessment and take bite-sized coaching steps toward improvement. Because what I know more than anything is that nothing happens overnight. And while this gives us some great awareness, there's action that has to happen continually to change behavior. So there's a lot of opportunity for that. In addition to that, there are lots of resources on the trainer site that give 52 weeks of things to focus on in DISC, and lots of different ways to have conversations and look at behavioral patterns and things like that with people you coach. So there's a lot of resources out there available.
Perfect.
Tony, would you add more?
You did a great job. I don't want to confuse people with just putting a whole bunch more. Let me just answer one question somebody brought up again. What do you charge for the report and the one-to-one debrief? Again, the retail price for the report is $97. You can charge whatever you want for the report itself. The one-to-one debrief, anywhere from $100 up. I think that if you're not certified, you may charge a little bit less. If you are certified and have the badge that you're certified, you could probably charge more. But again, people typically charge anywhere for the combination report and debrief anywhere from $150 to $300. So Jen, I thank you very much. We are out of time. Jen, would you go to Assessments 24/7, our website? I want to just end with reminding people about our users conference at the end of the year, which will be in San Diego, California, October 6th and 7th. That's a Thursday and Friday. It's at the Hyatt Regency Mission Bay. We have incredible lineup of speakers. We've done some research, and people who typically come to our users conference generally in the months after they're generating more business than they did prior to the users conference. So if you simply go to Assessments 24/7, under the About tab, you'll see the 2016 users conference. We have a lot of information about where it is. Scroll down a little, if you would, please. Some testimonials from people, how to purchase your pass, how to book your hotel reservation. And we only have so many rooms blocked. So if you're going to come, at the very minimum, block your hotel room. You can always cancel it later if you decide not to come. But if you decide to come later and haven't reserved your room, they may be sold out and they may be at higher rates. On the day before, October 5th, Jennifer is doing a certification day. So she's doing a half day on DISC and a half day on motivators. Here's the passes for it. And just scroll down a little bit more, Jen. Keep going. I just want to point out one more thing. Here is our featured speakers. And notice we have a day 1 and day 2 schedule. It does change every so often. We just decided we're putting Steve Sisler, who we call the DISC Motivators Whisperer. If you have not heard him, you are really, really missing something. And he's going to do 90 minutes on day 2 of our conference in the morning. So with that in mind, let's say thank you. Let's bring Zach back on the line and close it out.
Thank you very much. That was some really interesting stuff. For anyone looking to see this webinar again at another time, Angie will be sending it out at a later date. I can't say thank you enough to Tony, Brandon, and Jennifer. You guys did an amazing job. To everyone else, have a wonderful day.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Thank you.